Good morning, everybody. Morning. Hope I will be loud enough for you. It's not usually a problem once I get started and you start tuning me out. It doesn't really matter if you can hear me at that point or not. It's good to be with you today. And we're going to be doing a study this morning. Ralph asked me recently, where do I get my sermons from or my inspiration from for our lesson? And really it could be just about anywhere sometimes. Sometimes I can be listening to a sermon by somebody else and one thing that preacher says will trigger me in a thought. And sad to say, even during his lecture, my brain may go in a total different direction, and I might plan a sermon or get a sermon idea out of one thing he says and take it a total different direction. This morning, actually, what we'll be looking at in the Bible class, kind of the heart of it actually came from a Michael Jackson song. Just a portion of that song, so not necessarily inspired by God here. But there is something important in that song, and I'll mention it again at the close of our Bible class. But what I'd like for us to do, in Acts chapter 17, just going to refer to this verse. It's not going to be where we're at. But when the Apostle Paul became a Christian, or when Saul became a Christian and began going on these missionary journeys, he would go from city to city. And it was his practice, when he got to a new place, to go to the Jewish synagogue. There were already people assembled there. They knew about God. They were Jewish people. But he would go in there, and that's where he would begin his work in a city. If possible, that's where he would start. You know, he already had a built-in audience, and he was trying to reach them. In Acts chapter 17, verses 1 and 2, says that when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. Then Paul, as his custom was, went into them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and demonstrating that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ. I'm only pulling that up just to say what I want to do in our lessons today is just kind of do like Paul did. I just want to reason with you about some Scripture. I want us to look at some passages this morning, and I want to guide you in a way of thinking that, you know, the way I'm thinking about it. And I want you to reason with me and see if we can, you know, kind of grow from that experience. So I'm not here today to preach hard at anybody, but I just want to look at Paul's goal was to teach them about Christ and move them from where they were to a knowledge of Christ and salvation that was found in Him. What I want to do this morning is take us where we are as people who believe in God, maybe already a Christian, but I want to move us to something a little bit deeper in the maturing of our faith and examine ourselves in that way. All right, so really what I want to be looking at is helping us to have a more mature heart in some areas. Not that we're immature, but there's a tendency for us sometimes to be weak in some areas. And as a Christian, our goal is to become like Christ, to become more godly, become more like Him. And so that's really the direction I want to go in. And some of the things that we're going to look at this morning in particular, I want us to think about how we can develop a more mature heart, and by mature I mean spiritually mature, to be more like God's heart or Christ's heart in the areas of compassion grace, mercy, forgiveness, and patience, particularly as it relates to dealing with other people. So that's kind of the direction I want us to go. There are many things that we consider to be very, very important when it comes to being a Christian. Church attendance, being there every time the doors are open if possible. Bible study, praying, singing, making sure that doctrine is preached correctly. And every one of these things are very important matters. But in some regards, there are also elementary principles. Because as we become Christians, we learn about these things, but we need to move past them as far as our growth is concerned. We learn them, we're secured in them, but we need to move a little deeper in developing a heart of God. So our goal as a Christian is not only to learn basic principles, but to become like God in the sense of having a heart like God. We want to be able, as we grow as a Christian, to be able to reflect the same kind of attitudes and the same kind of feelings that God has, particularly as they relate to other people. And sometimes we can get stalled out there, okay? So I want to look at the importance of growing a mature heart to be able to reflect God. There's a couple songs. I looked at one, Let the Beauty of Jesus. You remember the rest of that song? Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. So there's another song, More about Jesus would I know, more of his grace to others show. We sing about these principles, about really becoming more like God, and developing a heart like God. So to become a mature Christian means we're developing in such a way that God is being seen through us. Jesus said that about himself. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He was once asked by a disciple, show us the Father. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So that's kind of a goal that we want to have as Christians, that people see the Father through us. Okay? So as we do that, and look at that this morning, I want us to begin at looking at some of the parables of Jesus that kind of teach us how to do that. The first passage we're going to look at is in Matthew 18. We're going to turn to Matthew chapter 18. And the passage that we're going to look at starts at verse 21. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? So this is kind of the introduction to the parable that we're going to look at next. And it has to do with Peter's question. How often should I forgive somebody that sins against me? And then he asked, what about 7 times? Okay? So let me ask you this. Was this a generous thought? Yeah. And if we're honest with ourselves, it was extremely generous. Yes. Because if we think about it, how forgiving are we when somebody sins against us? Sometimes it's tough. And if they do it once, for some people, you're never forgiven. You'll never be forgiven, no matter what you do. For some people, after a couple of times, I just can't believe them anymore. I don't put any trust in them. You just kind of have to wash your hands about it. And now, being honest, that's the way we are, isn't it? So we think about Peter saying 7 times. That's a pretty generous amount, if we're honest. You guys already know the parable, so we know it's not generous. But I want us to make an honest reflection today about how forgiving we are. And really, to forgive somebody 7 times is a lot for us. So how do we move beyond that? And what does Jesus want us to move toward? So let's look at the parable now. Beginning at verse 22. Jesus said to him, I don't say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. That's a lot. But he's not really saying there's a certain number you have to stop at. So he gives us this parable. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But he was not able to pay. As he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children, all that he had, and that payment be made. It's a lot of money. You can't pay it back. Everybody in your family is going to have to be sold. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. All right? What kind of characteristics did this master have? And when he realized this man, he's begging him, please have patience. He's not just saying, he's not asking him to forgive the debt. Just give me some more time. Be patient. You know? Now, if you've ever rented out property or anything like that, you probably known people who would use that, say, I just need more time. I just need more time. And maybe you might think as a landowner or a property owner, I've heard that before. You know. So I'm just being real here about things that happen. We've heard this before. But the master is moved with compassion on this man's plight. He really doesn't want to put him in prison, doesn't want to put his family in prison. And so he, because of that compassion, releases him and forgives him the debt. That's going beyond what the man is even asking for, isn't it? Just give me some time. So he forgave him the debt, and this was a tremendous debt. All right? But then the servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, which was a very small amount in comparison to what this guy had owed. And he treated him the same way his master treated him at first. He laid hands on him, took him by the throat. This is even worse, saying, pay me what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. I'll pay it all back. But he would not. He went, threw him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw that what he had done, they were grieved and came and told their master all that had been done. Then his master, after he had called him, said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had compassion or pity on you? And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due him. Verse 35. So my heavenly Father also will do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. So really, we think about this, we all understand from this parable, we understand God has forgiven us a great deal. And no matter what anybody else thinks about us, how righteous or how good we are, if we all are honest, we know what God has forgiven us for. God knows everything we've done, and God has forgiven us and been willing to forgive us. And he does that because of his heart. He has a heart of compassion. He wants to forgive us. What I'm saying is, God is very, very generous when it comes to forgiving. Would you agree with me? He has been with me extremely, extremely generous. And I don't deserve it. He's eager to forgive us. He wants to forgive us. But now if we're honest with ourselves, are we eager to forgive? Or are we reluctant to forgive? You know, we have passages that tell us, you know, we're to forgive men their trespasses as God forgives us our trespasses. And if we won't forgive men our trespasses, God will forgive us for what we've done. And yet, knowing that and honestly looking at ourselves, don't we have a tendency to be pretty stingy with what we're willing to forgive people for? We are. We're stingy. We'll forgive them a few times, but that's it. So, how do we move? So, what are we striving for then as Christians? We want God to be eager to forgive our sins. Shouldn't we be striving to be eager to forgive others? That's really what the parable is teaching. It's teaching us more than just about a number. If you don't forgive from the heart, that's the key here. We want to have a heart like God's heart. He has a heart of compassion and willingness, eagerness and generosity when it comes to forgiving. And our task, as we grow and mature in Christ, is to also be the kind of person who's eager to forgive. Oftentimes people say, well, what if a person doesn't ask? Do I have to forgive somebody if they don't ask for forgiveness? God doesn't forgive if you don't ask. You know, have any of y'all said that? Heard that? We all have. Okay? Because it's like, well, they never asked for forgiveness. I don't have to forgive them. Okay? The problem with that, for me, is that that's not really kind of reflecting the heart of God. God is not saying here, if you don't ask me to forgive you, I'm not going to do it. Rather, his heart is, I'm eager to forgive you. And so, where we are, where God is, there's a difference there. So I want to encourage us to try to think about in terms of forgiving. Where are we? Are we striving to be more like God? Are we weak in our reflection of Him when it comes to forgiving other people? Can we improve on that? How forgiving are we towards others? And I'm going to use this word several times today. Stingy. I don't know the last time I used the word stingy until I prepared this lesson. I got to thinking about it. We can be pretty stingy when it comes to who we're willing to forgive and how much we're willing to forgive. And I'm ashamed of that in myself. Let's move on to another passage. This time, very familiar passage to you, in Luke chapter 15. You're familiar with these parables in this chapter. Luke chapter 15, and let's begin in verse 11. He's talking about what is lost and God's love for the lost. Right? We've got a lost sheep and a lost coin and a lost son here. Okay? But I want us to look at the father in this parable's compassion. Okay? A certain man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of good that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. Not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. Prodigal means wasteful. We'll learn more about that in a minute, at least what his brother thought about that. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. he would have gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. He's in a pretty bad circumstance. What he hit the rock bottom, we'd say. If he's hungry enough to eat pig's food, what was left of it, what they're eating down, that's pretty bad. And nobody would give him anything. He couldn't get help anywhere. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare? And I perish with hunger. I will arise and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and he came to his father. Said, excuse me. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him, had compassion on him, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hands and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it. Let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. All right? We're all very familiar with this parable. How many of us have been the prodigal? How many of us, and I'm including myself here, have made extremely foolish choices sometimes, suffered a lot of consequences from those choices? Most of us have. Not all of us. Most of us. But what do we see in these verses here, 20 to 24, about the Father's heart? I've got an estranged daughter. I hadn't seen or heard from her in a couple of years. I'd like to. A little bit about what that's like. But how's the Father feel about this? Is he angry at his son? The choices he's made? The way he's wasted all that he had given him? No. He has compassion. He's full of joy. His son was dead and is alive again. We realize just how much God loves us and wants us to be with him and his family. How he wants his children to be in his presence. How he wants to bless them. Even in spite of what they've done sometimes. What we've done. That's God's view of us when we sin. When we make stupid mistakes. When we've done everything wrong. We burn bridges behind us so that nobody will even help us. But God our Father loves us. He wants us back in his family. Put a ring on him. Get the best of everything. Let's have a big feast. Let's celebrate. Okay? But now let's look at the parable as it goes on. Verse 25. Now his older son was in the field. And as he came near and drew to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. What was his response? He was angry. Wouldn't even go in. Wouldn't even go into the house. Therefore, his father came out to him and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time. Yet you never gave me a goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, doesn't even call him by name, this son of yours, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. What kind of attitude does this brother have in relation to the fathers? No way. He does not deserve it. Now, was this other older son, was he a good son? Yeah. He even says, I've never transgressed your commandment. Now, does he never sin against his dad? Probably not. But the idea is like, I have been loyal to you. I have done everything you've asked of me. And this son has wasted all the money that you gave him. He lived in sinful living. And it's just not right. It's not fair that you're going to make over him, have a big feast for him. Now, by all accounts, this brother was a good son. He was doing, what he should be as a son. He was faithful as a son. Okay? But my question is, did this son have the same heart as his father had? No. He was his father's son, but he didn't have his father's heart. He was angry, and he was angry at what? Angry at grace that had been bestowed on his brother. It's not fair. He doesn't deserve your goodness, your grace, your kindness. When we look at him in that view, he certainly doesn't look like a very good man, does he? But he felt that it's not fair. My brother doesn't deserve this. He deserves what he got for his choices. He made the choices. He should suffer the consequences. You shouldn't bail him out. He's not deserving of this kindness. Now, why was this parable told? Look over at verses 1 and 2 of chapter 15. Then all the tax collectors and sinners drew near to him, that is to Jesus, to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, This man receives sinners and eats with them. That was why Jesus told these parables. It's because these religious people, the spiritual leaders of the day, were complaining because Jesus was accepting these people who had made a wreck of their lives. And he was extending himself to them. And so the religious people, the people who were being good, they didn't miss a service, or were studying and fasting and doing all these things. They didn't think Jesus should be mingling with these people. But Jesus had a different heart. God has a different heart when it comes to extending grace. You see, if you look at what these scribes and Pharisees thought about what is deserved and not deserved, they're saying other people shouldn't get God's grace. What is grace? You've heard it before. What is the two-word answer to what grace is? Unmerited favor. It's favor that you receive that you don't deserve. You didn't do anything to get something. Grace from God is always unmerited favor. We don't get it because we deserve it. If we deserved it, it wouldn't even be grace. By the very definition, grace is giving something somebody does not deserve. And they did not understand grace. Grace is undeserved goodness bestowed on somebody else. Now, God, as I said before, He knows the facts of every deed and action that we have done. Do any one of us dare say that we deserve God's grace? No, even the best of us would have to admit, I don't deserve what God has promised me. I don't deserve what God has given me and is offering me. I just don't deserve it. If I receive it, it's got to be because of grace. And yet, God, knowing all that, is eager to extend grace. Just like this father is eager to run to that son, give him what he doesn't deserve. He did go waste everything. He as much as said, Dad, I wish you were dead now so I could have my inheritance. I want it now. I'm going to wait till you die. I want to go somewhere else and be my own man, do my own thing. I want to hang around here and work on the farm, whatever, you know. But the father in the parable is just eager to extend goodness where it's not deserved. So, I ask us again, do we have that kind of heart when it comes to how we deal with other people? Or are we far from it? We want God to be eager to extend grace to us. Are we as eager to do to others? Or how much of a reflection are we when it comes to extending that kind of goodness? These parables are just talking to us, right? If we really open up and listen and get past some of the what's really being said here. What does God want from us? How do we grow? All right, let's go one more real quickly if we can. Matthew chapter 20. Oh, what kind of class? Matthew chapter 20. Welcome. My name is Randy Meade. Just visiting here today to share with you. Matthew chapter 20. What I find is I've been looking at all these parables. I'm finding myself in these parables, and I'm not finding myself in the best pair of shoes. Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. This is a parable of the laborers in the vineyard. Okay? It's an interesting parable. It teaches us about grace, about how God extends grace. But we also see that there can be a stingy element on the part of those who receive grace. Chapter 20, verse 1. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now when he had agreed with the laborers for denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. He went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. He said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right, I'll give it to you. So they went. Again, he went out about the 6th hour and the 9th hour and did the likewise. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing idle and said to them, why have you been standing here idle all the day? And they said to him, because no one hired us. You know how many times I've probably heard preachers or teachers go over this parable and really get hard on those 11th hour people for just being lazy and not coming around looking for a job till late. It doesn't say that in the text at all. The indication is they wanted to work, but no one had hired them. Y'all ever sent out resumes for a job? And you send out resumes and you wait. Maybe you'll get a letter back saying, we've picked somebody else. Or, when we're looking for work, we stress a lot about that. These men had been gone out of the marketplace. Now keep in mind, back in that day, the marketplace could often be a very large area. There could be somebody over here hiring somebody over here. This guy kept going out. He found new people. Doesn't necessarily mean he always went to the same spot. But these men were idle, in the sense that they haven't worked. Why are you here? It's the 11th hour of the day. Why are you still standing here? Nobody would hire us. Why not? Were they lazy? Oh, sometimes people in life have a hard time even finding a job. Young man in high school goes out with his buddies. They do some drinking. Young, they do something crazy. Let's go break into that school over there. I'm just making this all up. breaking the school and they trash and stuff. They're drunk. Well, they get caught. They have to go to jail. 17, 18-year-old kids, they messed up. Now they got a felony charge on the record. The whole rest of their adult life, they're trying to get a good job, but guess what? That felony follows them. Young girl, her and her boyfriend do some things they shouldn't do. She gets pregnant. Maybe 80% of the other girls in her grade are doing the same thing. They don't all get pregnant. She can't go to college. She's got to stay and take care of her baby. Doesn't get a degree. She struggles. She works. She works, but she can't get advanced. She can't get the job she needs. Well, sometimes it happens to choices. Whatever the case, I don't know why these guys weren't hired. But I'm saying there are some reasons sometimes people struggle to find work. These men do. The man hires them. Says, you go into my field, I'll receive whatever's right, I'll give to you. So when the evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first. And when those came who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius. But when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more. And likewise, they received each a denarius. And when they had received it, they complained against the landowner, can't get that word out today, saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us who've borne the burden and the heat of the day. Not fair, right? They're complaining, this is not fair what you've done. You paid them the same as you paid us, and that's not fair. We worked all day, they only worked an hour. But he answered and said, one of them answered and said, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good? That is, your eye evil is often an expression that means you're jealous. Are you jealous of this situation because I'm good? I haven't done wrong. So the last will be first and the first last. Okay? What's interesting to me in this parable is in verse 8. When it's time to pay everybody, why does the master tell the man that's going to pay everybody to pay the last one that come in, pay them first? Why do that? By doing that, all those other workers who've been there all day, they saw that they got paid the same amount. What if he just said, pay the first ones that come in, pay them first? Well, they got paid and went on their way. Would have never known about the grace that was extended to these 11th hour workers. So when I see that, I'm like, is Jesus trying to tell me something here? Is there a reason why he wants these last to be paid first? Because what that did, it caused the complaining nature and the heart of these other workers who didn't think it was fair to be exposed. And it didn't need to be. And so a lesson was taught here. You know what? Grace is a gift. And I can give my gifts however I want to. You don't need to be jealous of somebody else because I'm giving them something that I think is right, something I want to give them. So we've been looking, for those of you who just came in this morning, we've been looking at how God is very gracious in giving when it comes to compassion and forgiveness, and sometimes we can be stingy with what we're willing to give and extend to other people. And we've been looking at some examples of that. And here's another good one. They were complaining that somebody else got what they didn't deserve. But again, as we just looked at in the previous passage, what is grace? Something you get that you don't deserve. So, again, if we're wanting to have the heart of God, realize there's probably some growth needs to take place in our lives. Can we look at others in that way? When we're dealing with other people, are we more willing to help people with what they need instead of what they deserve? Are we willing to give them more than they deserve? That's kind of what the heart of God does. Okay? So, we'll conclude our thoughts this morning by just reminding us that if we were to look in a mirror and see ourselves like we just pointed out the older brother should have been seen, he didn't see himself. These grumblers didn't see the grace of God and understand what it was. They didn't think everybody deserved what they did. God has been extremely loving and forgiving to us. He gave His only Son to die for us. We didn't deserve that. He's offering us forgiveness. We didn't deserve that. He's bestowing mercy to us. We didn't deserve that. He's a gracious God to us. So if we want to be like God, and we look at ourselves and evaluate ourselves, we need to ask, are we being stingy with what somebody else has been generous with in giving to us? So can we be more like God in that way? More about Jesus would I know, more of His grace to others show. When I hear that song, I don't think about, oh, I want to tell more people about the grace of God so they can accept it. I think if I want to be more like Jesus, I need to be more gracious, more of His grace to others show. Let that grace be reflected through me. I told you, for those of you who are here at the beginning, my inspiration for this lesson was from a Michael Jackson song. Michael Jackson wrote a song years ago called Man in the Mirror. And it was about looking out at the world and seeing people who were hungry, people who were having struggles. And the idea in the song is what's the best way to make the world a better place? And in the song he says, I'm looking at the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make that change. And that's what I think about and where I want us to think about the things we talked about this morning. Can I be more like God? Do I need to be more like God? There's more to Christianity than just certain acts. We want to be like God in our hearts. And the lesson this morning demonstrated, I think, maybe some direction for us to grow. Thank you for your attention.